The story begins with a medical team treating wounded soldiers during one of the battles of World War I. A French officer has been shot 3 times, but upon removing the bullets from his abdomen, the doctor finds 4. The last bullet is not German-made and appears to be made of silver. Then we go back to the end of the 19th century, 35 years before this. The family of Baron Seamus Laurent consists of his wife Isabelle and their children Charlotte and Edward. Close to their house, a group of gypsies arrives in wagons and sets up camp. Anticipating a great storm, the gypsy Florence hands a handful of coins to Theodore and asks him to prepare that silver. He melts the coins and molds the silver into the shape of long fangs, forming a hideous set of dentures that Florence then positions on the altar. That same night, Charlotte and Edward grow curious about the adults gathering and try to listen in on the conversation. The topic is precisely the group of gypsies that has settled in the area, claiming ownership of certain lands. The priest admits there are records proving the gypsies' claim, but says it's easy to alter that information and suggests they hire mercenaries to remove the intruders from their neighborhood, even if it requires threats. The next day, the barons go to the gypsy camp to put that plan into action, but the negotiation lasts not even 2 minutes before the first shot rings out. Surrounded by the enemy, the gypsies have nowhere to flee, and the barons continue shooting, in addition to setting fire to the tents. The devastation is complete, and the barons even pose for a photo, celebrating their victory over the weaker. Florence is captured along with Theodore, and the mercenaries also confiscate the dentures. One of Seamus's men begins to curse the superstitions of the gypsy people and complains about the invasion, as the gypsies invaded knowing the land had an owner. The mercenary has his eye on the silver teeth, but he holds such contempt for everything that he orders the object to be buried with its owner. But before that, Florence is forced to watch her friend's dreadful fate. After losing his hands and feet, Theodore is tied to a cross with a burlap sack over his head, and then hoisted up in the middle of the field like a scarecrow. Next, Florence is buried alive, reciting all kinds of curses while tightly gripping the box containing the dentures. Meanwhile, at Seamus's house, his children sing happily, unaware of these horrors ordered by their father close to their home. That night, Charlotte has a terrible dream about a scarecrow that moves its head on its own, and she finds herself digging in the earth at a spot close to it. At the village inn, a pathologist named John McBride arrives asking for a room and inquires if there have been reports of gypsies in the area. But the attendant dodges the question and becomes suspicious of him. Shortly after, Lieutenant Alfred appears to talk, and we see that the two are already acquainted. Alfred tries to probe the visitor about what he plans to do there, but John also evasively responds. The next day, Edward is in the yard playing swords as he usually does when smoke catches his attention. Following the mist, he arrives at the scarecrow, where he begins to hear whispers from a female voice. Edward starts to dig and finds the box with the dentures, having a vision of Florence immediately after. Suspended in the air, the gypsy starts to approach rapidly, and only when she is almost there does the boy wake up screaming. It was all just a dream, but Edward is now in his pajamas in the yard in the middle of the night, screaming. The next day, a boy named Timmy says he has something to show Charlotte and the other kids, but asks them to swear secrecy because Seamus could banish his family if he finds out. Arriving at the scarecrow, Edward says that the village elders prohibited children's presence there. Timmy replies that it was since that area caught fire, and then asks if the others also dreamed of the scarecrow. Everyone admits to having the same nightmare, and Timmy decides to dig up the box, ignoring his friend's fears. His hand begins to tremble as soon as he opens the box, and something seems to possess him, forcing the boy to wear the dentures. Turning to his friends with a horrific smile, Timmy attacks Edward and bites his neck. Charlotte runs home to alert the adults, who hurry to find the boy. The doctor is called and complains about the darkness in the room, but Isabel says that the light was bothering their son's eyes. After a quick examination, the doctor concludes that Edward was bitten by a wild animal, but Charlotte knows that's not true. At night, she has the same nightmare again, and wakes up to a strange noise coming from her brother's room. She goes there and finds Edward panting, as if he were in panic. Lifting the blanket, she sees that his body is being dominated by something that looks like roots and starts screaming for help from their parents. Seamus goes to his son's room and finds the bed empty, with bloodstains on the sheets. The front door is open, but there is no sign of the boy, and Seamus decides to organize a search in the woods. Charlotte gets nervous seeing Timmy among the volunteers, but she decides to say nothing. No one can find the boy, and Isabel is inconsolable with the loss. Days later, Lieutenant Alfred knocks on John McBride's door to ask for his help with the disappearance, admitting that there was an incident related to gypsies. At the church, Timmy calls Charlotte for a talk and reveals that he doesn't remember the incident. She recounts everything that happened and states that no one told the adults the truth because they respected their oath to keep it a secret. Timmy seems very shaken and starts reading passages from the Bible, saying that the dentures were made with the silver coins Judas received. He tears out one of the pages and hands it to his friend, stating that he left the dentures in the church's holy ground. But even that doesn't seem to lift the curse, and Timmy says that everyone will die to pay for the sins of the elders. Suddenly, the maid Anais opens the confessional door, and Timmy runs away scared while she takes Charlotte home. In front of the church, he has the impression of seeing Edward in the distance, shirtless. He goes after him, calling his name until he finds himself standing in the middle of the woods with something coming towards him. Timmy can barely see what it is when the thing passes by him, tearing his arm in the process. Terrified, he stumbles away and tries to hide, but the growls getting closer reveal he has been found. When Alfred and John arrive at Seamus's house, he warns that the situation has worsened and takes them to the cabin in the woods where Timmy hid. Alfred is shocked by what he sees inside and steps out trying to contain his nausea, but John decides to check for himself and discovers Timmy's remains, completely mangled. He finds a page from the Bible in the boy's pocket, with the passage about the silver coins underlined. Leaving the cabin, he declares that this was a wolf attack, and Alfred decides that this also closes the case on Edward. To Seamus's surprise, the lieutenant explains that the country is undergoing a terrible cholera crisis, and that there is no way to waste resources at this time. Despite this, John offers to continue the investigation alone, and Alfred does not oppose. After Seamus takes him to examine the house and tells him everything he knows, he recommends boarding up the ground floor windows as a precaution. John stays with the family, and during the night, he also dreams of the scarecrow. Only in his dream, he continues digging after finding the box, and he uncovers Florence's body. Then someone calls his name, and he sees a woman holding hands with a blonde girl. Turning around, John realizes that the scarecrow has vanished, and he becomes desperate upon seeing it across the way, taking the two away. When he wakes up startled and lights a candle, we see a portrait on the bedside that shows the same woman and girl. Unintentionally, he overhears what seems to be a fight between Seamus and his wife. John begins to understand that Isabel and Charlotte are so devastated by Edward's disappearance that they are unable to maintain obedience to Seamus, who values order and appearance above all else. The next day during the meal, Charlotte suddenly asks if they all will die, and her father forbids her to speak that way at the table. There is a stain that looks like blood on the door through which Edward fled, and John decides to scrape it when none of the residents are around. Back in his room, he runs the razor over his own thumb to extract a drop he can compare with the sample. The blood on the door has only one type of structure, and it stays static, while his own has one more type that is moving. The experiment is interrupted by a muffled sound that John decides to investigate. Peering through the nailed boards on the window, he catches a glimpse of a beast's eye and asks Seamus to bring the rifle. The creature is already gone when the two open the door, and John warns that it will be necessary to organize a group to go hunting. Seamus invites the other barons, and they are not very pleased to hear a young outsider giving orders. But John mentions that he was involved in a similar case that became very famous, known as the Beast of Gévaudan. The others are shocked to hear that the current case may hold the same gravity as that one, and ask if it wouldn't be better to call in the army. John even agrees, but explains that no one will come unless there is some kind of confirmation or proof. This convinces the barons, and they order everyone in the village to stay inside their homes and board up their windows until the beast is captured. However, it doesn't take long for a trio of peasants to disobey the order. Reluctantly and scared, a girl named Anne-Marie joins her friends Jacob and Callum for a quick task in the field. Hearing a strange noise, Callum picks up a heavy branch from the ground and enters the woods to check for danger. Anne-Marie calls his name, growing increasingly frantic, but he no longer responds. Now it is she who starts to hear furtive growls and feels something passing by very quickly. Searching for Jacob, she finds him hunched over the fence with a blank look, also not responding to her. Anne-Marie steps closer and, to her horror, sees that something is feeding on Jacob. She screams and runs away, but the creature knocks her down and begins to eat her. Callum appears out of nowhere and strikes the monster with the branch, urging his friend to run. A red spray hits her face, after which she crawls away until she musters the courage to stand and flee, knowing she is the only one left. Her neighbors take her in and alert the authorities, who only find some rags at the place she pointed out. John asks the survivor if she saw the animal, but her account is dismissed as a delusion because she said she saw a dragon. When John discovers that Anne-Marie has also been bitten, he asks to examine her personally and as soon as possible. However, it is too late by the time he arrives. As the window is open, Anne-Marie has disappeared, and the bedsheets are stained. Explaining to Seamus that the gravity of the situation is much greater than he thought, John orders everyone to stay inside the church and build a barricade, asserting that the village population is being hunted. Meanwhile, Anne-Marie is dragging herself through the woods and undergoing some sort of transformation. Looking confused, she pleads for water and screams when something starts to grow from her back. It's the same roots that grew on Edward, and they drag the girl into the river, wrapping her body like a cocoon. At night, the population lines up to enter the church, obeying John's recommendations. Wide awake, he talks to Isabel and opens up about what happened to his family. His wife and his daughters were among the victims of the terrible wolf of Gavaudan, and that is why he dedicates himself to investigating similar cases. He then talks about how a group of gypsies appeared afterward and recognized the tragedy as a curse from their people, which could only be contained with gypsy silver. Isabel begins to recount the massacre ordered by her husband, but he arrives just then and tells her to shut up. The next morning, John goes out alone to set traps and notices the hole in the ground while passing by the scarecrow. After much effort digging traps, his fatigue begins to mix with bad memories, and he only comes back to himself when he senses a presence. He catches a glimpse of the creature entering the cabin and stays alert, being careful not to fall into his own trap. When the beast exits through the door and charges, John pulls out of the way, and it gets impaled on the stakes. Then he wraps the monster up and takes it to the village to perform an autopsy. Seamus and the others are shocked to see that it is obviously not a wolf, but John doesn't seem surprised. He warns that the task will not be easy and begins to open the body of the immense creature until everyone jumps in fright upon seeing something moving in the entrails. A face appears, covered in slime and enveloped in a membrane. They soon recognize Anne-Marie and realize she is trying to escape, but John does not allow anyone to touch her. Explaining that the victims are already doomed and do not return the same, he convinces the others that a quick end is all they can do for her. Anne-Marie manages to break through the membrane and begins crawling out with terrible screams, proving that John speaks the truth. A shot ends her suffering, and Seamus is heartbroken at the thought that the same thing has happened to Edward. John loses patience with him and asks who the woman is that appears in dreams buried under the scarecrow. Seamus does not reply and refuses to believe in curses, saying his son was innocent in any case. He asks that no one tell Isabel what really happened to the boy, and promises he will hunt it down personally, because it is his responsibility to put an end to the issue. Seeing that opposing him is pointless, John waits for him to head out with the hunters to continue that conversation with Isabel. She shows him the photo taken on the day the gypsies were expelled, and John tells her about the page from the Bible he found in Timmy's pocket. He says that the key to the mystery is buried with that woman and has something to do with silver coins. It is then that Charlotte finally breaks the silence, albeit partially. She shows another page explaining the theory that the silver from the teeth is the same as that which was paid to Judas, and reveals that Timmy hid the dentures in the church's confessional. John heads there immediately, and as soon as he sees the object with his own eyes, he orders them to call the army. While Seamus and his companions await any sign of the beast, Anais quickly gathers the clothes from the clothesline. She freezes in fear upon seeing two hideous pairs of paws and screams when the wind pulls away the sheet, revealing the monster very close to her. The maid tries to run, but the beast leaps onto her, already splattering blood on the hanging sheets. After the creature departs, Anais drags herself inside and tends to the bites alone. In the church, John melts down the silver teeth and transforms them into 4 bullets. When Seamus returns from the hunt empty-handed and very irritated, Anais has already composed herself. She reveals nothing about the attack and strives to mask her agony while serving dinner to the family. However, John sees the blood-stained sheets and enters out of breath, asking if anyone has gone missing, but Seamus does not allow him to continue the topic in front of Isabel. Unconsolable, John says that this is all his fault and reminds him that his own family was also victimized by people like that. Seamus orders him to leave his house, but he says he will be waiting for the army on the porch. Charlotte asks her mother to sleep with her, and Seamus spends the night at the desk, while Anais undergoes metamorphosis in her room. Hearing strange sounds through the ventilation shaft, Seamus takes one of the rifles and climbs the stairs to check. At the same time, John comes in to make tea and leaves his own rifle at the door. Anais's room is like those of the other victims, with the bed empty and the sheets stained, but the window is closed. Deducing that she is still in the room, he begins to look around and is suddenly attacked, knocking over his candle. Isabel hears the kettle on the stove and goes into the kitchen, realizing on her way that Seamus is no longer at the desk. She asks John if he saw him, and it is just then that they hear the shot. John finds the creature lying in the middle of the room ablaze and runs downstairs when Isabel begins to scream. She says that Seamus passed by her and went out the front door. John warns that the fire is spreading and goes after Seamus while Isabel goes to look for her daughter, who by now is hiding under the bed. When John finds Seamus in the stable, he reveals that he was bitten and starts a fire to avoid his own transformation. Simultaneously, Isabel is trying to coax her daughter from inside the house when she sees the creature climbing the stairs. They quickly hide and wait for the thing to pass, but they can't stay there too long as the fire has already consumed the entire house. On tiptoe, the two reach the front door with John, who decides to take them to the church. In the middle of the way, he realizes that the creature has followed them and orders the two to lie down on the ground. Charlotte is horrified to realize that one of the fallen people there is her grandmother. John fires the first silver bullet, and it indeed drives the beast away, giving time for the three to reach the church safely. Timmy's father loses his patience upon hearing that Seamus has gone and that the plan is to wait for the army's arrival. He wants to go out now and take revenge on the monster, but John explains that he only arrived alive there because of the silver bullets. As they are not many, it is necessary to wait until daylight to use them, with better chances of hitting the target. Hours later, everyone is sleeping as Isabel prays for her son. She begins to hear howls outside and approaches the door. On the other side, Edward's voice calls for help, pleading for her to come outside to help him. Isabel begins to unlock the door in desperation, and everyone wakes up to the noise, but not quickly enough to stop her. She gazes into the dense fog outside and holds her breath when the monster reveals itself. The men begin to shoot, but nothing seems to deter the beast, which invades the church, spreading chaos and destruction. John fires the second silver bullet, missing the target, and Isabel screams above the commotion, determined not to flee from her own son. She ends up being bitten, and John asks for her forgiveness before shooting again, with no other options. The bullet pierces Isabel's body and hits the creature, which reverts to the form of Edward. Both lie on the church floor until the boy opens his eyes again, but his mother does not survive. After the tragedy of that night in the church, he remembers nothing, and John adopts him along with Charlotte. It is then that we discover that Edward will live another 35 years, for he is that French officer who loses his life on the battlefield.